my side. Let me tell you, I don't know what I did, but goddamn. Anyway, so you guys ever think about the stock market? I mean, in a real way? Well, I do. And I look some stuff up, and, you know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but damn, it seems to be like it's fixed. But hear me out. I'm going to run down just some of the trouble the world and mostly this country has had over the last 400 years. There was the great tulip bubble burst of the 17th century in the Netherlands. There was the financial crisis of 1791, 1792 that involved Mr. Hamilton. There were many, many panics all through the 1800s across this country and across the planet. Probably one of the big boys, the Great Wall Street crash of 1929, 1932, and the recession that followed. There was a stock market crash in the early 70s in Britain, Black Monday in 87 here, the recession from the 90s that was caused by the invasion of Iraq, 1991 when Japan's asset bubble burst. That lasted 20 years. The dot-com bubble of 2000, and then of course our financial crisis of 2007, 2008. And then what, in 2011, there was like a 21% drop on August the 1st. Basically just a massive adjustment. And those are just a few examples. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But let's start with the Netherlands and Holland in the 1600s in the tulip bubble. And this is kind of interesting, and many of you may have heard of this and may not have, but it's kind of interesting. So, I don't know, 1630s, we'll say, the Netherlands in Holland, tulips suddenly become very, very popular. Part of this is because most of Netherlands is Protestant, and there's a little sect that's incredibly strict called the Calvinist. And Calvinism is kind of running the country at that moment, and probably a larger part of the world. And one of the parameters of Calvinism is you can't show any wealth. No jewels, no luxuries of any real sort. It's just frowned upon. No nice clothes, nothing of that nature. So it becomes very frustrating because, as you know, the Netherlands, at that time, the East India Trading Company is massive. I mean, that's a massive company, a military force. These cats are trading spices and doing things, and some of these guys are making some money, and they want to, hey, we want to show off a little bit. But because they're Calvinists, they can't. Well, one thing that's allowed is to wear a tulip, I guess, in your hat or on your shirt, or hell, you could probably carry it around. So tulips start to become very, very popular. Now, tulips only grow or bloom, in the spring. And quickly in the Netherlands, they become the symbol of luxury, to the point to where if you owned one tulip, you were rich, and if you owned several, you were, super rich. It got to be so incredibly big that even tulips with a virus, which would create lines or discolored flower of some sort, much like our stamp, a stamp with an error or a coin that's got a misspelling or something on it, those become even more valuable. Well, again, since they just grow in the spring, and they don't last that long, it's somewhat problematic. Well, the stockbrokers at that time, they come up with this idea. They're going to write a contract to sell me or to sell you tulips in the spring at a set or fixed price, and that price is based on the number of farmers that grow tulips, what they believe the weather's going to be, etc., etc., etc. These contracts, they called them futures, which is a word we still use today. They're basically betting on the future. I'm going to sell you X number of tulips at this price. We're assuming the farms will produce them, etc., etc., etc. you could also sell that contract. So I buy the contract for X number of dollars, and then I sell it to you for X number. I don't know what the Netherlands dollar is. I sell it to them, or I sell it to you for X number of dollars more. All in the hope that these tulips will bloom in the spring and we'll get the virus ones, we'll get et cetera, et cetera. You follow me? Well, at some point, these tulips get to be, or the futures, at least the contracts, some of these contracts cost more than a house. And essentially, I'm buying a bundle of flowers that are worth more than a house. And society sort of calms back down and says, wait a minute, this is dumb. And then suddenly there's a bubble because no one wants to spend that kind of money on tulips. Now, I don't know how it affected the market necessarily. I'm sure some people lost some money. I didn't look that deep into it, but I thought it was kind of interesting. And, you know, that's the first time we hear about stockbrokers and futures. Now, let's flash forward a little bit to the 1920s. So World War I, right? The war to end all wars, the Great War, which I always think is funny. You know, wars don't make one great. But America is pretty pleased with itself. It's victorious in World War I. And post-war economies are always pretty strong, especially in America, in part because whoever asked, we just kicked, we tend to rebuild. World War I was Germany, so we use our resources and our labor to rebuild what we just blew up, and back home, sort of the same thing happens. As a matter of fact, the U.S. economy actually doubled in size from 1920 to 1929. It doubled in size. We needed more food, we needed more steel, we needed more wood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People were feeling really, really good. You want to buy a house, you got to build the house. We need roads. Ford has just sort of perfected his assembly line. Cars are affordable. Everybody feels pretty good. Now, in order for an economy to grow that fast, it has to borrow money. And borrowing money isn't necessarily a bad thing, because a farmer may mortgage his property or his home to buy the adjoining property, grow more food, because more food is required, right? So we want to expand, we're going to grow more food. A factory may borrow money to buy more machines, to build another building, to hire more people, because whatever the MacGuffin is that they're building, the world certainly needs it. They're going to hire people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, at that time, the U.S. Government is printing money like crazy. And what happens at that time is regular folks start to invest in the stock market. They start to take some money and they're investing dollars that they possibly borrowed or possibly had into the stock market. Now, what ends up happening is a couple of things. The brokers, again, say I have, I don't know, I've got Amazon, for argument's sake, is $1,000 a share, and I have $10,000, so I have 10 shares. Now, if it goes up, just to say it goes up $1,000, well, I just made 10% on my money. That's pretty good from a percentage standpoint. From 10,000 to 11,000, right? But a lot of people don't look at things in percentages; they just look at things in larger dollars. Boy, instead of having 10 shares at $1,000 a share, what if I had 100 shares? Well, those stockbrokers said, hey, you know what? If you have 10%, I'll loan you up to 90% against that 10, and now you can have 100 shares at $10,000 a share, not just 10 shares. I'll be happy to loan you the money. And the brokers go and borrow money from banks, which are more than happy to loan that money because the economy is cranking and doing very, very well. That's called margin trading. And you are now in a leveraged trade or position. But you don't care because things are going great. We're sort of keeping up with the Joneses, if you will, or FOMO, as they say today, right? We're going to do this. Nothing can stop us now. Well, sorry to say, I'm sad to report, something did stop. Although from 1920 to 1929, the stock market increased 220%. 220%. That's an astounding number. No one thought it would ever end. But what happens is when the economy grows that fast, the feds have to push interest rates up to sort of slow things down. You just have to. Well, as they start to push interest rates up, borrowing money gets a little bit more expensive, and saving money makes a little bit more sense. So now instead of people gambling, using margin trading on money they don't have, they start putting money in the bank because they're earning enough interest to make it worthwhile. So that train sort of slows down. Does that make sense? The problem is a lot of people were leveraged positions. So now all of a sudden, I invested $10,000 and borrowed $90. Instead of this share being worth $1,000, now it's only worth $500. And guess what the brokers want? They want their dough. They don't give a shit about the stock market going up or down. That's not their problem. Their problem is you owe them $90,000. So what do? Because you got to pay that. You start to try to sell anything that you have. But everybody was doing this, and if there's no buyer, there's nothing to sell. So if you're trying to sell that car that you bought, especially if you bought it on credit and you're upside down, now you're trying to sell it and it's worth less than what you owe, it becomes a sort of problem. And this is happening, repeats again and again and again. And basically what ends up happening is people start selling things off, and then you sort of come to your senses because you realize, hey, that Amazon stock, is it really worth $1,000 a share, or is this all just speculators? We hear people talking about it, and it's going to be this, it's going to be that. And Amazon may not be the best example, but you get the idea. People start to believe that the companies aren't worth as much, and they start to sell, and they start to sell in mass. And like I said, the stock starts to go down instead of up, and then you get that margin call. That's where the brokers, for everybody who has a leveraged position, say, hey, you owe some money, you better pay. Everything collapses. Everybody's selling shit. No one's buying anything. It all goes to hell in a handbasket. So the stock market dropped 23% in 2 days. By 1932, 25% of the entire country was unemployed. That's a quarter of the people, working people. And half of all banks went belly up because they were over leveraged. Now let's flash forward to 2008, the housing market bubble. You'd think we would have learned our lesson, right? You'd think we'd learned something. We even put laws in place to prevent certain things, but along the way, that's a different rat hole to go down. Presidents and they undo those horrible rules that try to keep things in check because it's anti-capitalism. Anyway, 2008, the housing bubble takes off. Now, they start writing loans, and loans are a little bit like that, a broker giving you money. Hey, you put 10% down on this stock, I'll give you the other 90. But the difference between a house, though, is it's a tangible asset. You have to qualify. There's some things that have to happen. Well, people are buying houses at a pretty good clip. And what banks start to do is they figure out, let's pool all of these loans that we have. We'll put them all together. And I don't know how many are in the pool, just say, 1,000 loans. And they call them mortgage-backed securities. It's just a pool of loans. Now, the bank takes those mortgage-backed securities, those bundled home loans, right? You understand? And they go to investors and say, hey, you can buy this. And these investors are cats like Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. You've heard those names before. So this pool of loans or these mortgage-backed securities are offered to them. And it's actually seems like a pretty good deal because Lehman, the lender, they're going to buy the loan, and so the bank gets their money back, right? And the Lehman Brothers, the lender, the investor gets the asset and the interest on that pool of 1,000 loans. Does that make sense? So the banks have loaned 1,000 mortgages. They bundle together in a mortgage-backed security. Then they go to Lehman Brothers and say, "Hey, do you want to buy this security? It's paying an average of 4%." And they go, "Yeah, we'll do that." They buy all those mortgages. So now the bank has more money to go write more mortgages, Lehman Brothers is earning interest on that money that they basically gave to the bank, and they have a tangible asset. If for some reason people stop paying their mortgage, which would never happen because people have to live somewhere, they're going to pay their mortgages. Well, this obviously became really, really popular, and this happened again and again and again. And they just keep doing these mortgage-backed securities. And I'm just picking on Lehman Brothers because they popped into my head, but all the others were doing the same thing. It got to be so big that even insurance companies wanted to get in on the process. So now Lehman Brothers has all these mortgage-backed securities, and an insurance company comes and says, hey, we're going to go ahead and insure those just on the off chance that someone doesn't pay. And but we don't think so. You're going to pay us a premium. So the insurance company is now making money, and Lehman Brothers is like, hey, we'll pay because you're backing it. It's insured in case someone defaults. So that's no longer a potential bad debt because it's insured. It's backstopped. This just goes on and on and on. It grows and grows and grows. Well, what ends up happening, of course, is at some point the pool of home buyers start to dry up because not everybody can qualify to buy a house. I'm sorry, but it's true. Not every person has a down payment or enough income, yearly income, to be able to afford houses, well, especially in California, but all over the country. Well, what banks start to do, because they don't want this party train to end, they start writing subprime loans. So now your qualifications are a little looser, or it's an interest-only loan for 3 years, and then it's going to jump up to 10% or whatever, or 4 years and jump up to 10%. And the hoople-headed people that are getting subprime mortgages, they want a house so bad, they're starting to believe all the hype on the news because obviously people are buying houses very, very fast. So the price of houses are going up quickly. So in their head, well, if we buy it for $400,000 in 3 years, it'll be worth $600,000. We'll just refinance out of that loan and we'll figure it out in a couple of years. The house it's just going to keep going up and up and up. Well, yeah, maybe. The other thing that's happening at the same time is people's equity has gone up, and instead of, you bought your house again for $400,000, now it's worth $600,000. You don't refinance into a fixed loan. You take a second out and you go and buy a boat, or you go buy some sports car, or you take a cruise ship to the Bahamas or something. You take that equity because you figure it's never going to end. In 2000, the value of the housing market was $1 trillion. By 2008, it had gone to $50 trillion. Mortgage-backed securities, it's going crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. And then it ended. For the exact same reason. You ran out of lenders, everybody's borrowing, and then at some point, people begin to realize, hey, this single-family home can't be worth $800,000. It just can't be. And everything starts to tick back down. And the people that took their equity out, they became upside down on their house. They can no longer afford, or the house is upside down, and they've got an interest only, and now they have to start paying on the principal, and their house payment goes from $1,000 to $3,000, and they don't have the dough. They don't have it. And all of those people who said, well, everybody's going to pay their rent or their mortgage, what's the worst can happen? Tens of thousands of people start to default on their loans. So all those mortgage-backed securities, that one pool of 1,000, if 800 of them stop making their payments, Lehman Brothers isn't getting that interest. They're not getting that money. It's a bad, bad deal. And as you all know, too big to fail. The government had to come in and rescue the banking system, the housing system, just unbelievable things that happened. And it's going to happen again. We don't seem to learn anything. And the only thing I can think of is why this keeps happening is one reason only. Right? When is enough enough? What's with this FOMO shit or keeping up with the Joneses? Get your little piece and hold it together and be smart. If you invest wisely in the stock market, you can make some money. You need to look at the percentages, not the dollar amount. If you buy $1 stock and it goes up to $1.05, that's a 5% increase. That's more interest than you would get at the bank. But people don't think that way. They want to buy more and more and more and more and more and more. Anyway, I don't really know where I was going with this. I just thought I would share a little bit of that. I'm fascinated that we seem to rinse and repeat in our financial systems, and every time we're shocked, and I know what you think, well, who's to blame for this? We are. Everybody's going to say, oh, it's the brokers, it's the banks. Yes, they have some culpability. They're just as culpable when they wrote a loan, a subprime loan to someone for an $800,000 house that was only making $25,000 a year. They knew full well that there was no way that person was ever going to be able to make other than an interest-only payment, and they wrote the paper anyway. But the person who signed the paperwork, if they were grown up, they also knew they couldn't afford it, and they shouldn't have been in that room either. They're both equally responsible. I'm going to lean more towards the banks and the brokers because they had a vested interest, they had less to lose, and they take advantage of people who are trying to capture the American dream. But I'm rambling now. But anyway, I hope you kind of got a kick out of this. It's sort of nonsensical. I think it made some sense. I'm not saying don't invest in the stock market, but invest wisely. Do your homework. Anyway, in this world, when you can be anything you want, you be kind, you be humble, you be forgiving. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.